Hello, everyone. This is shamanic astrologer Erik Roth. I'm back with another episode of Science, Planets, and Stellar Rhythms. I've taken a bit of a hiatus, not entirely expected, but I've had a lot of transition in my life. So I now back in action doing videos again. This is going to be episode 57 in the series. I have posted a few videos this year, but they weren't part of this particular series. One was about the masculine, and another one was an interview from a psychic, Donna Schmid, who asked about shamanic astrology, and I was on her podcast. Actually, I'm going to be doing more with her in the future, along with others too. So something to stay tuned. But this is going to be about astrology. This is going to be about a particular alignment that's happening this year into next year. So we're going to be really getting into this. As of this recording, today is July 21, 2024, and so let's get going here. All right, so we're going to be talking about Saturn-Jupiter squares, or Jupiter-Saturn squares, depending on how one wants to put them. I believe that they're kind of interchangeable. They're both squaring each other. Jupiter's the faster of the planets, coming up to square Saturn, so one could use that one as well. This is episode 57 of the series Science, Planets, and Stellar Rhythms. My name, again, is Erik Roth, shamanic astrologer, also alchemical astrologer. So what are we going to get into? What are the highlights of this episode? Well, it's an overview of the Saturn-Jupiter squares and the pattern of Saturn and Jupiter. And then there is a wonderful report by Kelly Lee Phipps, an astrologer, about elemental waves of Jupiter and Saturn. I'm going to talk about obviously the dates that to expect the Saturn and Jupiter squares, and of course the meaning of this. The meaning will be sprinkled in throughout this episode. So an overview. So Saturn and Jupiter square each other 3 times upcoming in a series. Once beginning August of this year. And I'll go over the dates in a little bit here. But these squares mark the first quarter turning point in time between the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction and the Saturn-Jupiter opposition. So back in 2020, in December, Jupiter and Saturn were conjunct at 0 degrees Aquarius. So this is the first sort of hard aspect or hard angle of these two planets together since that time. Astrologically, Saturn and Jupiter relate to our middle world. They help us experience and expand our lives, focus, ambition, and also connecting to the magic of synchronicity, along with, in the case of Saturn too, when I say focus, it can feel like a contraction, can feel like, we're having to grow through limits and boundaries to get there. And in the sky, Jupiter and Saturn form a 90-degree square, like a first quarter moon that you would see. That would be the moon is squaring the sun, and half the moon is visible, but it's called first quarter. And in December 2020, as I shared, it was one of the closest conjunctions between these two planets in hundreds of years. I think even longer than that, actually, but at least that long. Okay, so I want to go over just a little bit. I did a separate video or an article. I wrote an article about Jupiter and Gemini. I might record a specific video just about this, but this is Jupiter will be in Gemini in 2 of the 3 squares this year. The 2 of the 3 squares are in when Jupiter's in Gemini, and then the third one doesn't happen until June of 2025, which I'll get into. So just to go over this a little bit, I got to refer you to my website about the article of Jupiter and Gemini at inspiralnexus.com. And I'll put a link below to that so you can look at that as well. So Jupiter moves into the sign of Gemini, or has moved into the sign of Gemini back on May 25th, 2024, and will stay there until June 9, 2025. Jupiter tends to expand all that it transits. So all that it touches, sometimes it can be considered beneficial. Sometimes it can be considered like something something's obviously maybe toxic or unhealthy. And no planet in my work, and coming from the language of shamanic astrology at the core, no planet is either good or bad. Everything has an expression, an archetypal expression that is within our own lives. So it can amplify, in this case, amplifies Gemini's qualities of imagination and the mind. Gemini is a sign where conventional rules don't apply and the desire for the mind to know it all. So Gemini is extremely curious. It's a strong communicator, writer, Imagineer. It helps us, the contrarian type of energy, kind of the Peter Pan and storyteller of our time. In ancient times, or in Native American lore, it could be considered you know, the coyote. On sometimes certain birds like the blue jay would be kind of fall into that category a little bit, that sort of that trickster category. Um, so the last time this Jupiter and Gemini transit happened was in June of 2012 and through June of 2013. Meanwhile, Saturn is in the sign of Pisces, and it began all the way back in March 7th, 2023, and officially lasts until February of 2026. Now, in 2025, Saturn does toggle into Aries a little bit for some months before it backs into Pisces once again. So the entire period of March 2023 to February 2026 is not only Saturn and Pisces, it does get into Aries. So something to keep in mind when you're reading this information here. So Saturn tends to address the middle world issues that include the structure and systems of our lives, relationship goals, financial health, the physical health, and in particular our bones and our stamina. Saturn also shows up in laws and rules of humanity. So it's you might could say, the kind of the lawgiver or enforcer at times, the one who really helps us show up in our lives in a real world way, that, you can't get away with just, trying to trick your way through life or just to slide by. Saturn's right there as that teacher looking over us, that guardian, that guy looking over us and helping us keep our own path in a way that really helps us in this middle world, be real for ourselves. So Saturn in Pisces also connects to these particular themes. Pisces is a sign that has a lot to do with empathy, compassion, spirituality, being of service in the world. And some of its shadow elements, can be considered like escapism, including like going into drugs and alcohol. But it can really thrive in places where it can be of service in the world, and really bring out and bring the heart to the surface, rather than being repressed and just essentially just doing the work without any empathy or compassion. So Saturn and Pisces, which seems kind of like an odd coupling, if you will, but Saturn obviously, just like all planets, go through all 12 signs. So in this case, Saturn and Pisces is about these particular themes. I did make a video about this one last year ago, two years ago. Last year, so 2023. So Saturn and Pisces is about these themes: illusions in our lives and being able to see them in reality. So it helps us come into a space where we can actually see that it's not illusion, that it's not just a rose-colored glasses or some type of romanticism around something. It also can help us with dreams that we can bring into reality as well, and what would work on a practical level. So if we might dream something, it is kind of taking us to task and saying, well, can we make this dream a reality? So this is a chance for us to work with that throughout the entire Saturn Pisces cycle. There's also an emphasis on sustainable healing in the wholeness of our bodies and psyche. One thing about Pisces is that it is also known as a healer, and it wants to be of service, but it does it through the heart, and it's a natural fit to be a healer. So with Saturn there, it can be something that can, in its sort of beneficial way, show us a pathway in a practical level, how we can bring those different kinds of healing modalities or Western medicine, all kinds that come into a space with the heart, with compassion, maybe even spirituality, into a place that can help and benefit others health-wise, not just in the physical health, but mental health and spiritual health as well. And then also our responsibilities around our own spiritual development, empathy, and being of service to others. That's what Saturn Pisces can also bring in here. All right, so let's talk about the Jupiter-Saturn pattern, the Saturn-Jupiter pattern. They have a much larger pattern, and together that is quite regular. Many cultures from ancient past looked upon this pattern to help them understand larger ages of humanity and important events that shape culture, economics, government, and religion, spirituality, and the future. When these two planets conjunct, they enable a pathway through to a manifestation of structure, inspiration, systems, and expansion. The signs and elements of these signs are of great importance, of these planets really, are of great importance as they colorize a deeper meaning of conjunctions, squares and oppositions and trines, even sextiles. Because the sextiles and trines, I'm not just going to look at, obviously focus in on the hard aspects, but I might mention that there are these independent, in between, say between a square and a conjunction, there's a sextile that happens. And then in between a square and coming up to the opposition, we have a trine. So those are also kind of like transitionary points for the Saturn and Jupiter pattern as well. All right, so every 20 years. So this is if there's one like celestial thing in here, what happens every 20 years? Well, it's Saturn Jupiter conjunctions every 20 years. We had one in 2020. Prior to that, it was in the year 2000. Prior to that was around 1981. So we have these, like sometimes it can happen a little bit before 20 years, sometimes a little bit after, depending on the retrograde loop on the Saturn and Jupiter. But that's what happens now. There is a lot of potential evidence to suggest that the historical Star of Bethlehem was the combination of Saturn and Jupiter combining their lights back there in that early part of over 2,000 years ago. So, and then we also had another situation in 2020 where we had the closest lights of Saturn and Jupiter coming together, where they just about merged their lights and became kind of one. And so in shamanic astrology, Jupiter and Saturn represent this middle world. And when they come in together, it really matters really strongly here in our conscious reality. It isn't. I mean, all planets can impact humanity in the form of change throughout our lives on a personal level, but also collectively speaking. But the conjunctions are the most powerful ones. Now, the squares and oppositions, they also chime in strongly too, but not to the extent of the conjunction is the thing that starts it all. So what started at the conjunction creates sort of this 20-year span of time. And 20 years, of course, can be considered a generation, along with some that might say, oh no, it's 30 years. It depends on which sort of truth you go into, what you tune into around that. But it's in that sort of that zone. And the Saturn Jupiter is right in that zone for sure. So the conjunction really starts the process. And then this is in 2020 and 2021, we reached that turning point. And we saw how powerful 2020 was. That now it wasn't just Saturn and Jupiter, of course. Astrology, we were looking at Pluto's combination with Saturn and Jupiter together. They got within pretty close together in March of 2020, as well as in November of 2020. And there was like some separation here and there in between that. But that went through, and in Saturn and Jupiter were pretty close together all the way through early part of 2021. So now we're at this point where we're at a turn since that 2020, 2021 period. Usually around the 4 to 5 year mark from the conjunction to the square. And so the themes of this, astrological meaning of this, is illusions of idealisms and new technology. So this is again, Jupiter and Gemini and Saturn and Pisces. This is kind of the main sort of force of these squares. Now, the last square that they have in June of 2025, there is another sort of level there because they're in the signs of Cancer and Aries. So I write a little bit about this here, but I probably will do a little bit more about that particular square next year when we start to get to that point, closer to that point there. Other things that happen, this certainly relates to Pisces, because Pisces can be very indecisive. It's not doesn't have a lot of like clarity other than to be of service, and it's emergence with spirit and the heart. So there can be certainly in this case confusion and polarization that can happen in the structure and systems we surround ourselves with. This is including Jupiter and Gemini. Greater tension and stresses around what we believe and our current reality. More expansion of entertainment and creative processes. So particularly with the Jupiter and Gemini, that definitely is something that can be really a focal point for societies. And then continued attempts and uncertainty to regulate or enact laws around drugs, either by removing restrictions and or working with them constructively. We've seen sort of this since Saturn certainly was in Aquarius and then now into Pisces. We can see throughout the United States anyway and other places that various states have tried to enact different laws to try to deregulate certain kinds of drugs or marijuana and other things. Like that's part of this sort of this theme that Saturn and Pisces has been about. So when it squares Jupiter and Gemini, this could be where it can get a little more confusing, more contrarian type of energy, where it seems like it's going one way, but then it flashes back the other way. There's this greater polarization that can happen with this kind of combination here, Jupiter and Gemini and Saturn and Pisces. So this square is really interesting, and there's obviously I'm going to give you the dates and as to when these happen here. So the next slide here, August 19, 2024, that's the first one at 1727 Gemini Pisces, Jupiter and Gemini, Saturn and Pisces. 4 months later, December 24th, 2024, at 1401 Gemini Pisces, that's the second of the three squares. And then the third one happens 6 months later, June 15, 2025, at 1 degree, 18 minutes Cancer and Aries. If a person, if you or someone you know has any personal points or planets in particularly the hard aspects in Gemini and Pisces or in Virgo or in Sagittarius, you're definitely at the impact of this square process. Even myself, for sure, because I have 5 planets in Sagittarius and a couple of them in Pisces as well. And my natal Saturn's in Gemini. So I definitely have some, personal impact by this. But, if you do, or someone you know, or maybe a client or whatever, this is something that'll be really strongly in their field. As well as those that happen to have some of the early degrees of the household or culture bearer signs, the cardinal signs in traditional astrology, Cancer and Aries, as well as their opposite members of Libra and Capricorn. Again, this is the early degrees. Those will also be strongly impacted as we get into June of 2025. And then the next wave of this, it happens in 2029 and 30 through 31. This is unusual. We have 6 oppositions at that time Jupiter and Saturn in the signs at first of Taurus and Scorpio, and then in Gemini and Sagittarius. Again, this is that next wave. That'll be halfway between the two Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions. The next Jupiter-Saturn conjunction will take place in 2040. So that'll be the halfway mark between those two. Well, there's also a larger cycle of 200 years. And there is a researcher, an astrologer, Kelly Phipps, who goes in to explain in a report that each of these four elements create elemental, what he calls trigons, that take 200 years to complete. There's even a broader 800-year span that where it goes through all of the different elements, as well as where the Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions transition between elements. Sometimes, like in what happened in the 20th century into the 21st century, we're currently in an air wave, elemental wave with Saturn and Jupiter, but we were transitioning from Earth to air. In 1981, we had it happen in Libra. In 2000, it happened in Taurus, an Earth sign, Libra, an air sign. And then in 2020, we had Aquarius. So we're going to have air signs for some time over the next couple of centuries here. So just something to be aware of. And there are things that happen and that Kelly Lee Phipps describes. So in his work, Elemental Wave Chronicles, the air elemental wave is Libra, Aquarius, and Gemini. He writes how the element of the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction create their own themes throughout humanity. In the current time, we are in an air elemental wave that began to appear in 1981 when the conjunction happened in air sign Libra, switching back to earth sign, as I shared earlier, in 2000, and again back to air in 2020. And so air elemental waves are the Renaissance periods marked by intellectual revitalization with philosophical and scientific roots that drive social, political, and economic transformations. So the mind is the thing that's sort of coming into form here in the middle world more strongly. Now, this is not, I'm not adding in like what's happening with Uranus or Neptune or Pluto or Chiron. Those all play powerful roles in humanity too. But the Saturn-Jupiter thing have definitely a much more sort of really powerful impact in the middle world than those other planets do. But those ones contribute immensely too. Like for right now, for example, Pluto in Aquarius, that's going to last an entire generation all the way till for another 20 years until 2044, when it will start to transition out of Aquarius into Pisces. But meanwhile, it's contributing more of that air. And what's interesting is next year we have uh, what is that? Uranus moving into Gemini. And so for a time we will have this sort of this air wave that started back in 2020, and then it will include Uranus and Pluto in air signs as well. Neptune's going to be transitioning to Aries, a fire sign. Now, there's more in his work. He does research also with the other outer planets and their patterns. So there's information there. I would just do a Google search. I might try to find that link where I got this article from. I think he had to pay for it because it's a pretty long piece of research. So I recommend reading up on that. There's a lot of great stuff. It's kind of a little bit in the vein of what Richard Tarnas wrote about in his Cosmos and Psyche book. It has some things in there that you kind of pick up on that when he talks about the outer planets and their impact in the night sky. So here is what it would look like on August 19th when we have the very first square. You can see Saturn sitting between the fish and the water bear constellations. And this blue line here that's like through this symbol of Saturn here, this yellow dot that symbolizes Saturn in this graphic. This is the movement of Saturn back and forth through this area of the sky, where it will be from here through all the way through June of next year, 2025. And at that time, Jupiter and Mars will be in conjunction at that square. So that's a really unusual thing where you have another planet or more coming into an actual square of Saturn and Jupiter, or could be a conjunction. The moon will move into, I think the day, 1 or 2 days later, the moon moves into conjunction with Saturn. You get Jupiter and Mars in conjunction, and the moon and Saturn squaring each other, August 20th, 21st, that zone there. That's something to as we go into that time period, we get that 90-degree angle here in August. Um, this is these two planets really help us move our energy in the middle world in a constructive and sometimes expansive fashion. It sort of is the sort of the part of the engine that drives things, if you will, in our lives. But they, of course, when you throw in the other outer planets, and they have different impacts on how that engine's also going to be expressed too. So we'll, as we move into this territory, it could be pretty volatile. Squares are typically something that tends to create a lot of tension, but it's also there, and even crises, but it's also there for us to realize that we, our evolution, our personal conscious evolution, without change, without the tension, without the stress, most people on the planet would not change or evolve much. It's only when certain things we meet that challenge us that we actually can shift our perspective, or, look at ourselves more closely. So humanity tends to learn the hard way. And so this is like this Saturn-Jupiter square can show us that piece within ourselves. I don't feel like this period is going to make all that much sense during particularly the rest of this year and through a portion of next year, until we get to that, until Jupiter moves into Cancer and Saturn moves into Aries. But even then, we move into a Saturn-Neptune conjunction period, so it may not even make any sense at that time. Now, just be aware that this is, we're having a lot of flexibility and room to grow here for all of us, that this is not where things are necessarily going to be all uh, uh, nice and orderly, if you will. It's going to be a little on the messy side, I feel, but we'll get there. And messiness and chaos are things that help create shifting for us, and also we find ways to bring it into order when we get into that chaotic period. So I still have a lot of hope for humanity, but we still have a lot of big things to sort out here. Okay, that's all I wanted to share with this particular video. As a shamanic astrologer, I offer personal astrology readings, mentoring, classes, events, and astrocartography. My website's inspiralnexus.com. I also have done some online courses with Caitlin Castell at mystaralchemy.com. And I am the author of a book, Sacred Hearth Within, a book about Vesta in astrology. You can find on Amazon and some select bookstores out there as well. Feel free to reach out to me through my website, inspiralnexus.com, or by email, inspiralnexus@gmail.com. Thank you all. I look forward to the next video, but I'm grateful to be back doing these, and I wish you all the very best and take care.